I want to start this conversation with gratitude. First, I want to say thank you for joining us. Next, I want to just honor the ground that we are standing on today, that we're sitting in. I think about the legacy of our ancestors that have made significant contributions. There's one person in particular that I'm thinking about that no matter the day, if you asked him, how are you doing, he would say, first class, Fred. That was Dr. Leslie Collins, who was the first African-American to receive the PhD in American Studies. But and while we're working or walking or talking about art in the gallery, the person sitting beside me is always like, man, I just wish other people could hear what we're talking about or what they're saying. And so I'm grateful for us to have the opportunity today. Before I go any further, I would like to introduce you to Michael J. Ewing, curator, intellectual thinker, a convener of people and ideas. Michael was a class of 2013, art major and psychology major. He would go on to do projects as a curator, independent curator in Paris, South Africa, Houston, among other places. I joke and tell the story. I think I hired him once, then I hired him back as consultant later, and now we're working in the future on some collaborative projects.
It's so great to be here. Yeah, as Jamaal was saying, I think that when you think about art, or as a curator, I think sometimes I wish that audiences, people at home, could kind of hear the conversation that we have, and Jamaal is really particularly interesting to me because he straddles that fence between an artist and a curator. I think the way that he thinks around cultural memory, the way that he collages these ideas and concepts, his work in repository, really informs the way you kind of think, right? Like the way that you think is very much in an abstract manner. And so sometimes I can be linear, sometimes I can come from like a very art historical canon. But what I appreciate about you is you always, push me and push audiences to kind of think around the loose kind of connections that these have. And so I guess to pose a question at you, because, I kind of want to just reframe kind of the conversations that we have, because those are conversations we have a lot. But in a time like now, right, where so much is happening in the world, what do you feel is the power of art? Or how do you feel art functions, or how art can function in our contemporary period right now?
That's a good question. And matter of fact, it's a loaded question, right? But I'm going to have to unpack. I'm going to borrow from two people to kind of think through this question, because these are the people that I rely on in a lot of ways to help us think through a topic like this. And what you're asking me is, what does art have the capacity to do in times that we're living right now? Yes. So I'm going to borrow from Maria Magdalena Carta-Spons, who called art a matter of fact, at your show, and had the opening. And she was in the opening of your show that was part of the Tennessee Triennial Repair, was a theme that she called the art the visual representation of the soul of humanity. So I'm going to start there to think about what the art has capacity to be. She defines it as that. But then there's someone we invited, Lonnie Bunch, 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian, to come to Fisk, and they gave a talk to me, Appleton. And in that talk, he talked about the curatorial process. And what I loved about it was that when he talked about the curatorial process, he wanted it to be like a cookout at your grandmother's house or your aunt's house. He said he wanted, it's a transmission of information that he was wanting to capture, where you would go over and you talk about this piece and over, like you talked to your aunt, did you hear what they said over here? So he wanted this exchange of ideas. Now, what he calls art, or institutions that display this cultural memory or this visual representation of the soul who met, he said that it helps us understand who we have been, who we are becoming, and who we aspire to be. So that then lays the groundwork. But for us, in a lot of ways, we can use collections to amplify or to tell these stories, right? So I remember, I'm gonna tell a story about Jamaal. I learned how to use color by looking at James A. Porter's Woman with a Jug. But what's amazing about that piece is that it's a woman with a jug. It's a Monday woman holding a jug that won a 1933 Schomburg. She wasn't sexualized. She was a caricature. It is a mundane woman with a jug. That was done, that won the 1933 Schomburg, right? So when you think about images of blackness, when you think about the way that the image of the black woman at that time could be finished out, caricature, that image of that mundane woman defied the image of blackness of women at that time. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, what artists are doing are reclaiming the narrative. Yeah. Also, you can think about we could think about another one, an artist that come in to help us tell these stories, to help us to unpack these ideas. Southern roots, the southern landscape. What do you see? I know you know that work well. What do you see in that work? Describe it to me. I know you got it in your head. We're talking about Walter Williams, but Mike, I know you know that work.
Yes. So one, man, thank you. I think it's really incredible when you talk about one first from Maggie Campos Pons, who's a mentor toward both.
Yeah.
Around what the power of art can be and the capacity of. You give a visual example, which will probably meant to make sure the viewers you see that if you have a chance, Google "Woman with Job" by James A. Poor.
No, come visit us.
Yeah, come visit us. We have it in our collection. But Walter Williams has been interesting. Walter Williams has this beautiful work in his iconography, has these trees that are upside down that deals with the abundance of black poles, has these beautiful scenes where in the back, you'll see kind of foreground, you'll see these individuals picking cotton, but the people that are closest to you are picking flowers. And he talks about these layered stories. And so I think that one of the beautiful things that Walter Williams did in his work was he talked about the interview he did with David Driscoll in 1972, is that he would show you something beautiful. And by the time he took his work home, you would see kind of the political. And so that's one thing I think, just to add on to what you're saying, is I think that art has the capacity, and I think of comedy in the same way. Comedy has the capacity to talk about really hard things, but deliver it in such a funny way that by the time you receive it, unguarded it, you're able to get a message much deeper. And I think artists are prolific in creating these visual, sonic, or multisensory representations that allow you to sort of disarm and sensorially take in, and then you have this other message that's behind it. And so I really love that you kind of centered that. And so I would take a slight pivot, because I know kind of being intentional around what this channel is and what this podcast is kind of engaging with, I think art also has the parameter or the power, the transformative power to speak to kind of mental health. And so I would love to speak up. It's an artist I've worked with recently. He's a good friend of yours. Actually, I was introduced to his work through you. His name is Wesley Clark. He's based in the DMV area. And Wesley Clark started to do these works that he called thought exercises, with these abstract kind of drawings. And the reason I bring this up is I think about you is that if any of you ever need to spend any time with Jamaal, you'll see that he always doodles, he always draws like these kind of like streams of consciousness of these artistic ideas that he kind of fabulates on paper that are quite beautiful. But I think of them as this kind of meditative moments. Even when you talk or when you're thinking through things, you always have to have a piece of paper to draw on. And so when I was working with Wesley Clark, we were working on this show called Human Synthesis. I was talking to him about his thought exercises. He talked about he would listen to go-go music. And that these thought exercises, which he didn't understand then, right, until I put language to it, I was like, these are your meditative ways, right, deep. This is how a person approaches yoga. This is how approaches breathing exercise. This is how a person approaches their meditation. And so he kind of sat with that for a minute. It was like, it is, right? And once you put language to it. And so that's one of the things I think is really beautiful about art, is that art has the capacity to support mental wellness. And artists can channel mental wellness even when they don't know that they're doing it for themselves and for the final product that they create. And so I would love for you to talk about that, because what you do as an artist, certain work, Jose, which is very tactile, which is very demanding for you to use your hands and touch. How do you think about your work and your craft in a way of like wellness, meditation, or a way of like helping you to express your mental health, or there are other activities? I'm thinking of your garden.
So Mike, what Mike is trying to do, for y'all that don't know, he's been trying to get me in the studio and to talk about my work, and I didn't know it. Not this capacity, but I will say, but I will answer it for the sake of the podcast today. And we call artists that are working, they call it a practice, because we're constantly working towards something. We're practicing the same way that we believe physicians practice. And so with that, my process, and the process goes across almost just about everything, is to build, bury, and excavate. And so you're living like you're being like I'm paused. And so there is a meditative space, or there is, and there's two ways I can answer that question. It's loaded too. You got these loaded questions. You try to cut them off the head before I can get to my questions. But build, bury, and excavate is part of process. Build, bury, and excavate. And so if you think about the terms as a sculptor, when you talk about in terms of building your belief, it's to bear, I mean, it's to build it up. And then I bury it. And as a painter, I will build up the four and then bury it and then sand it or polish it with the allure. And a lot of that is referencing memory. I'm going to divert from the question just a little bit because the question really goes to a broader statement. That's like the why. Like, why am I in this role? Why do I do this work? And it crosses all roles or aspects of my life and career. It's really about access. So access of this information, access to these ideas, access to one finding one voice, access to one listening or one seeing for the first time, one to engage this material for the first time. I'll be remiss if I did facilitate access or bring access to this material or these experiences. To answer your question, I think more loosely or more formally, is that this is where I learned how to speak, was literally through shape and form and color. So when you talk about mental health, I may not go deep into that, but when you talk about where my voice is, where I was able to clearly articulate my ideas, was through art. I could never find the words to speak. It'd be so much easier for me to draw it out or to make it or to show it to you as opposed to finding those words. So how does that, so in some degree that translates, and I do think you're hitting on a touch or a few, not a few, but a really valid point, because for me, though, in a space where we're talking about mental health a lot, for me, it's more about well-being. For me, it's about trying to find another word outside of well-being that talks about the way I think about art. I wish I had my pen in front of me. I would draw it. I would draw it out. But the other part I think is so important is that it's always a reference. In order for us to be looking forward, we're always looking back. Also, it's almost like envisioning what the future may be. So I tell folks all the time, what we see today, we'll see to perform because artists has envisioned that. When we talk about, like I tell folks about, we talk about Barack Obama. We saw black presidents before Barack Obama. We saw him in film. We saw him in TV. We read about him in all different life forms. We saw it before we actually saw it for the first time. Yeah. And so I think a lot of ways that artists are casting future. Mike, part of your curatorial practice is to engage people through multisensory events or projects. So when I think about the dinners that you organize both in London, Cuba, Houston, Nashville, really bringing people together, I always think about how are we reaching the next generation and how are we reaching back to generations of the past? It's a twofold question because I really want to know how this informs your practice. These things inform the practice. The other thing I think is so important, or that when I watch you, is how you get so excited when you dive into the art. And so my question is, do you mine for information? And he did multi-layers into the archive to inform part of your practice. And so I want to roll it out is that when you're thinking through these social circles or these social events or there's a proper word for it that if I had a pen and pad, I could tell you. And then also this kind of other part, I think they're both research, like the other research element of actually going through the ephemera. And so how does that inform your curatorial process or even your thinking process beyond curatorially? How does it inform you? Like what's the input, what's the output?
I think first I'm going to go back, to your answer quickly. I think you said something that was really critical when you give me an answer around mental health. You said, I'm not going to talk around mental health, but I'm going to talk about expression. And I think a lot of the cause for people having disruptions in their mental health is a lack of having outlets for expression. So I think in many ways, when people have the vehicle to express themselves, they have a way to kind of get themselves to mental wellness or to sustain their mental wellness because they feel heard in whatever medium they're able to express themselves.
I'm going to cut you off right there. So when I speak with and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I do think it's important to talk about the material. So in the way I think about the material. So for example, if when I would paint and I'm painting on a canvas, it would communicate, it would vibrate, it would come back and forth. Well, however, I enjoy painting on wood. And the reason why I enjoy painting on wood because it doesn't respond back. So I can scream at the wood and it just takes it. When I can scream at the canvas, it's going to give it back to it. But continue on with that's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think to your question around like how do I engage this multi-sensory audience. I think for me, it's, as my degree is in art and psychology. And so I approach, some of my curatorial peers approach curation from an art historical lens. I approach curation sometimes, to my mind, says of a therapeutic lens of like, what information can I pair with this artwork, rather from writing my labels or I'm putting together exhibition, empower, support someone. And so I think that's something that gets me really excited, is that actually a recent mentor of mine, we're working on the exhibition again, Robert Hall, former curator here at Fisk University, graduate of Fisk University. He was like, Michael, what you really have to do is always catch the story of the artist, like catch the oral story. And so for me, one of the reasons why I love to go into the archive so much is sometimes I feel curators, sometimes we can center ourselves in our voice, in our interpretations of the work. And particularly when I'm dealing with artists of color, African diasporic artists, I really want to mine and find what they were thinking. In a particular case, what they were thinking at that moment, right? A person that comes to mind is Burl Hooks, who's an artist who would go for their joy. And I was recently listening to an interview with Burl Hooks, and the interviewer was talking around like, he's like, man, what is it like creating work around the Black experience? And Earl Hooks didn't so much push back, but Earl Hooks was just like, he really was coming from a humanist lens of like, it's the human experience, right? And so he's like, this is my existence, right? Like, this is how I navigate. And so sometimes contemporary language, I might sit on right and say, yeah, deal with the Black experience and canonize them in a way, but those weren't languages or those weren't categories that they would describe themselves in those contemporary times. And so for me, going into the archive, excavating for that information is a cultural responsibility to really pull their voice to the forefront. And I think the brilliance of a great curator isn't in the curatorial voice. It is in the collaging and the stitching of creating a story. And so I think that's something that I really enjoy working with you. I worked with you as a gallery coordinator for a few years, and you would send me into the vault to find these works. And so, you would call me an hour later, like, Mike, I thought you were supposed to find this work. And I understood how artwork without context would just permeate. I would be in the collection just looking at these artworks. And so that's the same way I think about when I put an art show together, right? It's like when I'm curating a show, I'm like, what work in conversation with one another would just say something? And the only text I want to give in the label is something that will elevate it or empower the work to make a message more succinct, or to allow the person, the entryway, to understand what the work is trying to do, or what the artist is wanting to do in the work. And so, man, I'm excited. I'm excited for this time to conversate with you. Like you said, I think sometimes you as an artist, art administrator, I mean, your title was long at Fisk. You have so many hats. But I think the core ingredients of what you do is the way that you think and the way that your mind works. And I think very much the mind of the artist is what spills over in the way that you do administrative work, in the way that you can look at projects, in the way that you look at policy, in the way that you look at how you lead the gallery, how you teach as a professor. And so it's a profound honor to have this conversation with you today. And my hope and my wish to the audience is that you find those mentors that mean something to you. Find the people that you value. Have those conversations. Not only that, create your archive. Find the people in your family, your grandma, those voices that you feel like you're going to miss later. Just put the voice recorder on and ask for those recipes. Ask about those stories. Be curious. And I think that is one of the strongest attributes that we both shared, is that we're deeply curious about things. And we ask a lot of questions. The reward for being curious is the empowerment of new information and new perspective.
You get to see.
You get to see. You get to see at a different level, at a deeper perspective.